Okay, let's go ahead and get started. We don't quite have quorum, so we're going to jump down to director's report, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, thanks so much everyone for being here this morning bright and early. First, let's see, action items. So, on the report, the first thing that's kind of exciting and maybe a little bit, we don't have any Central Utah folks here, do we?
They had their, if I remember right, don't they have their meeting down in St. George or wherever they're at?
They do. I think they were going to try to send something.
They were going to, yeah.
Utah Lake is shockingly full. I checked I made this update when I printed the agenda, but then I checked this morning, and we're now at a steady rise up to 1.16 feet below full.
That's
So
astounding.
coming into the spring runoff, almost full is rather exciting.
So is Deer Creek and Jordanelle.
Yeah,
They're at like 85.
so
Crazy.
It is crazy. Island's still an island. Yeah.
this is very good news for us, probably even better news for the Great Salt Lake, because they're the ones that stand to gain water when everybody's full. So we're excited about that. It brings a whole new suite of issues at Utah Lake. There's no winning scenario for lake level, except that from a recreational standpoint, people love it when it's full because it's much more safe as far as boating and access increases. They can get into Provo Bay, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have any blooms. So trying to set expectations. The HAB thresholds, as point B here, I'm sure Erica can give us an update on this, but over the last year, EPA came up with some new guidelines for the thresholds on harmful algal blooms. And so what matters most to us and potentially to the reduction in articles in the news and announcements for advisories on Utah Lake is that the lower threshold that puts the lake onto an advisory for microcystin and Cylindra spermopsin both doubled. So they're fairly large windows or threshold windows, but they went from 4 to 8, 8 to 15, and then we're told by Ben Holcomb, I'm not sure what his title is anymore, standards manager, that the cell count potentially could also, the lower threshold for that could jump from 20,000, it's currently 20,000 cells per milliliter to 10 million, so a really wide window. Supposedly they're entertaining the idea of bumping that to 40,000, but haven't made the decision. Is that your understanding?
So we have a group of the Water Quality Health Advisory Panel that's made up of public health officials and my assistant director, and a couple other different agencies, PHEWs that met yesterday to discuss this. And it happened at the same time that I was at the Utah Lake Science Panel meeting. So they discussed these ideas, and I think we will make the change on the toxins, and then the cell counts, because those are sort of independent of toxins in terms of how they exert health effects. I'm interested to hear a report out of how that discussion went.
And that was his update yesterday afternoon or something like
Yeah,
that.
so we're looking at updating that. We'll have to meet with the State Department of Health and the Utah County Health Department here before we make that final.
Erica, do you know if they're going to start talking about making maybe 2 different levels? Because having such a wide window is rather
So we had that.
deceiving.
We had that.
Okay.
We had 20,000 and 100,000 and then 10 million. And it was
Caution, warning.
and danger, and it was very confusing to people because, every week it would change between caution and warning, and that was meaningless to the public. So then the group recommended, the communications people recommended that we simplify and just have warning and danger. So then the question is, should that lower number be raised to be less protective
Yeah.
of public health? So these numbers, the reason they doubled is EPA changed the assumption of ingestion. So, if you back out how you get to a number, it's really based on a risk scenario for a child. And so they halved the assumption of how much water might be ingested through recreating in a water body. And so by having that assumption, you can double the concentration that's allowed, have the same toxin ingestion in terms of the load. So that's where it came from. So we'll follow the EPA's recommendation on those for sure.
And it really is a good happy medium in my mind. Many times throughout the summer, we've been hovering right around that warning mark. Occasionally, we jump well into the warning, and clearly it ought to be more. But we've had pretty long periods of time where we're just kind of right at that hover mark, and so by doubling the low end of these thresholds, that really will be helpful at targeting in on, the more, high-risk blooms. So I think that it will be a more reasonable approach for the county to know that it's probably wise and prudent that they're warning at that point. So.
Okay.
Well, I like that we're not, we don't have so many steps. It's either red or it's green, with
Yeah.
maybe a yellow. in
Got
the
a
middle,
yellow.
but
We've
yeah,
dumped
right,
the orange.
yeah. I don't pay attention to yellow when I'm driving, so. It's great.
Eric, do you want me to add something too?
Yes, please.
So State Parks has been working with water quality and whatnot, and we are gonna make HABs more of a know before you go campaign. And so on our website, we have ice conditions or different things like that. We're actually gonna make it one of our main information things and try to make it not this thing that, the media blows up and it's a big disaster, especially if it's in isolated areas. We've had some reservoirs where it's literally, in a 10-foot section, and the whole reservoir is closed. No, it's not. It's just this little section. And so we want to try to make it more of a common thing. Hey, know before you go, check conditions before you, it's just like the weather and everything else. This is another thing that you need to check. And so that's part of our new thing that we're going to be trying, and we're working through messaging and different things like that. But that's going to be coming from us pretty soon.
Awesome. And that'll just be a link to the habs.utah.gov site?
Yeah, and then when they click on it, it'll go right to HABs
Perfect.
for that water body. So if
Yeah.
they're looking at Utah Lake, for that state park, it's going to go right to that, at that warning or whatever's going on. And same thing with all the other reservoirs for state parks. So
That's great.
yeah, I think it's going to help a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that it's that blooms need to be fully normalized, but the recognition that blooms come and go on the various water bodies throughout the state, if that's somewhat normal to people and they simply are checking to see what the status is,
Right.
as it is, most folks hear that there's a bloom once in the summer and in their mind, they write off that water body and,
Right.
"Oh, I'll try this one now." And
Yep.
so.
That's what we're going to try to make it more of a common type thing.
Check status, not
Yep.
write off.
Yeah, just like snowmobiling and any other recreational thing, you gotta check avalanche conditions and everything else. So we're just gonna
Yep.
make it part of your boating and recreation, know before you go.
Great. Okay, this summer, we are going to try some algae treatments on a couple of our marinas. Right now, we are moving ahead with 2 of those. One at Lincoln Marina, the county's marina, and that will be with a group called CPRO, and they are doing a combination of, well, they've given us a few options actually. So they have something called Earth Tech, and then they're going to do some type of copper. But they've got a couple different options on the table right now, so we'll be finalizing those. It's not so much that we're going to choose ahead of time what they're going to do. It's more they're going to react to conditions, and they have a couple different treatment possibilities for depending on what those conditions are. So they'll be working. We've got them working with Division of Water Quality permit. I don't know what their jobs are, but they're the ones that issue the permits for water quality when using an algicide like that. So
The pesticide.
Okay. The other treatment will be at Linden Marina, and that is ATS. Should know what their acronym stands for, but they always use ATS. They're just fairly local here in Utah, and they'll be doing another type of copper treatment in the marina, and they'll do that every 14 days throughout the whole summer, and be monitoring that closely to see how effective it is. So we're excited to see those. There's one other potential treatment on the table for the Utah Lake State Park, but we haven't ironed out all the details yet, so we're waiting to hear back from them.
Eric, when will these two treatments start? Spring or all the way into summer?
The one in Linden Marina will start, slated to start June 1st.
June 1st.
The one in Lincoln Marina, they're more interested in demonstrating a post-bloom treatment, and so they'll have the green light to start in June, but they will wait until they hit a threshold, and they're going to come back to us, and it'll probably be just something right below a warning threshold, so that it doesn't actually go into warning. So maybe
So it'll be a
less than
post-bloom.
40,000 cells per liter, less than 15 micrograms of cylindrous spermopsin, or less than 8 micrograms of microcystin.
So they have the scope of their project anytime, a post-treatment bloom after June 1st.
Yes.
Okay.
Is this a group that's done this before in another body and had good success, or
For
is this
sure.
kind of a beta for them?
No, both of these groups have done work all over the country, and in many cases all over the world. And in all reality, the treatments that we landed on are not as innovative as we might have hoped for. They're kind of tried and true. Copper treatments are we know they work. It's more a test to see how well they work in Utah Lake, considering the unique chemistry of the lake and the durability of them. So find out if they treat once, how long does it last? Utah Lake's a windy lake, and it mixes as a result of that. So are these treatments effective in an isolated area, or thus, and if they are, potentially, when we scale up, we wouldn't have to treat the whole lake, but rather we could treat really the hot spots in the lake, and if it shows that they last for a little while, then that could be feasible. One of the issues with the third group is the scope of theirs wasn't quite as large as we hoped it would be, and so they're trying to figure out if they can scale it at least to a whole marina, and if they can, great. Well, maybe we move ahead with that, but we really do need these to be able to be scalable treatments if we ever proceed on treating a larger portion of the lake.
So is it in the budget? I mean, financially, how does that play out?
Not well. So,
Yeah.
realistically, it's more of a, how important does it become to the legislature? Because it's their constituents, all of us, who are complaining when summer after summer, the lake is seeing regular blooms. And if it's important enough, then it would need to be an appropriation, because
It's
they're
like
not
Phragmites
cheap
or anything
at
else
all.
that we do, we create a budget and we go after it.
Yeah, and the unique thing about it is that there really isn't a standing pool of funding for treating blooms, whereas there is for invasive species and things like that, that they're dollars that are set aside that we can go after, and we usually do successfully. This is a unique one, and it needs to.
Well, I know in other areas of the country, like say in Texas, treating the water is very common in the shallow ponds and stuff. That's why these companies exist. It's not that they just pop up yesterday because Utah has blooms.
Oh yeah, the east, in the east,
It's just the financial impact. A lot of landowners will treat their ponds so that they get better bass fish out of
Yep.
it, that type of thing.
So with
I
that,
understand, I'd be curious to know, is there a revenue generation process that would then offset the cost, or do we just go ask for money, or bond, or grant, or, I don't know?
I don't think a bond would be very, because since it's ongoing, we would, I mean, we
I'll run
would do
that
that. It would
past my
definitely need to be,
citizens, see how
yeah.
it goes, right?
So
definitely
with that,
get-
Eric, like you said, on a statewide level, they have a pool of money already set aside. What is the chance that we?
Not for algae.
Not for algae.
Right,
So
for
these
the
guys are doing it
others.
for free?
For
or
the,
what?
for,
How they
for Phragmites or carp, we've always gone for a
Right.
specific
Right.
purpose. What is the possibility of us as a group lobbying to have that as one of their new categories that we could then ask for money to go forward?
I think that's one of the benefits of doing this test. And so, to your question, we have the funding for these tests.
Okay, all
We
right.
don't have the funding for the whole lake, right?
All right.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Or ongoing.
Or ongoing, right?
And that's why I'm saying maybe it's time that we lobby for some
Yeah.
ongoing funding, because we know these tests are coming, and it might not be this legislative session that they approve it, but if we start the lobbying effort by next year, maybe it would be in
In
the
their
forefront
heads.
of their minds that we really are working proactively to try to treat these blooms and make the water safer for, in lots of different areas, of course, but recreation opportunities are huge. That's one of the biggest budget line items of revenue source for our state is tourism. And so I think we have a lot of different angles that we can go forward and say, how can we get this as an ongoing revenue stream?
Erica could talk to this well, but I think one of the opportunities that is out there is to find a balance between air quality and water quality in the state. There's air quality, obviously, especially along the
Yeah.
Wasatch Front, is a very, very popular item, meaning
That's obvious.
an unpopular issue, thus it's popular for funding. And so there's quite a large funding pool that goes towards
There.
air quality incentive programs and to the department to figure out how do we make the air better. Water quality is a big issue in the state, but it doesn't get nearly the attention that air does. So if the lobby was pushing at finding even a small amount of balance between those two issues,
Yeah.
I can't really speak to the budget until I see the governor's budget.
Okay.
But I can say last year, I think the governor asked for 100 million for air quality, and I think the legislature appropriated 14 million.
Yep. I think part of it is just who speaks loudest, and that's why I'm saying, as a group representing this issue, I think the voice could be heard.
And I should say I'm supportive, the department is obviously supportive of that.
We just need to link water quality to air
That's
quality.
right.
I mean, that lake effect has everything to do with the weather.
Actually, there's a new study that just came out last week showing Great Salt Lake levels, not quite water quality,
dust,
but yeah,
right?
generating
Yeah.
a huge amount of
Yeah.
dust in
Yeah.
northern Utah.
Yeah.
There's politicians.
Now, if we could just get algae blooms to have something to do with air.
How many-
Well, I think what Kerry said is a good idea, because we just met with our 3 legislators, a senator and 2 representatives, and we have a lobbyist, and if we combine forces, I think that we can, people will get noticed. Do we have an idea, what is it, what is the budget for just the test sites? Do we kind of have a number
the
where it would be?
two that we're working on are about 100,000.
What's the usage of the area during the test? Is it going to be off?
It'll be full.
Full usage.
Full usage? Okay.
So the goal of this treatment, and this is where I took some heat, was holding off until we initialize this right at the beginning of the summer, when we can send out some press releases and say, hey, look, we are doing something about this. Not only are we doing something, but you will see a noticeable impact on the marina, one of these 2 marinas that you go to, so that when you go, regardless of whether there may be a bloom happening out in the lake, you can go to Linden Marina and you can swim in the marina and they'll be monitoring it, but as long as it's keeping up, it'll be fully usable water quality. And so we're hoping to get as much leverage out of a treatment on a single marina in the lake as we can, from a publicity standpoint, and really try to get folks to be supportive of that type of a endeavor until we can treat the long-term sources of the problem, which is what we're also working on, and we'll talk about a little later.
Very good. Move on to Phragmite.
Okay, so the Phragmites treatments have been really successful this year. We continue to get good reports. I think I've been quoting Keith on, as we drove through the shoreline of Vineyard, and he was with us and looked out and said, I shouldn't quote these with you here, but I'll embellish a little bit. Just pointed out that he hadn't seen the shoreline there looking so healthy and with native vegetation coming back in a long time, since you started. I don't know.
Hadn't seen the shoreline, period. Yeah. And now you can see it in there. And
Yeah.
then you can see places where there's a little bit of sandy beach being exposed.
Yeah. So it really is working. It's nice to have these machines that can get out there and mow down or crush down the dead Phragmites that have been treated. And it's starting to work. We're starting to see really cool results. So this year we'll be doing a similar amount. It's this 4,300 acres on the north end of the lake. So it starts in Saratoga Springs City Marina and wraps around the north and all the way down into Provo Bay. So that's our priority area. So far it's looking like we're able to get a little bit more than that with the funding, especially when the lake is high. There's less of a shoreline to worry about.
A legislator. You should talk.
And so that's working really well. We'll be putting in an application through both UDAF, Department of Agriculture and Foods, and DNR's Watershed Restoration Initiative. Right around the 1st of January is when, or a couple weeks into January, for about what we did this year, and that's 160,000 2 times. So we just try to split it between those 2 grants, and that'll cover those costs this coming year, with the addition of we get support from Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. The commission puts some dollars into that as well, and that allows us to get lots done each year, at least half the lake. So the new thing that we hadn't mentioned before, but we did budget for it, is the purchase of a forestry head for the county to attach on. They picked up a new skid steer that's big enough to handle this thing. It's a really impressive disc that's steel like this with teeth on it, and it just can drive up and mow down I should have done more.
The tamarisk.
sound effects, but, mows down trees up to 10 inches in diameter. And so it'll be used to mow down the salt cedars along the shoreline and the Russian olives that are not equal to Phragmites in problem, but they are rather prevalent along the shoreline, and it'd be nice to cover those so that we can be getting some of the more native trees and shade trees growing in along the shorelines that are much more desirable.
I just want, who operates all the equipment? Is that a county, or does it go through?
The county.
Okay,
So the county has 4 or even 5 now grant-funded employees.
okay, grant
Who
funded,
run-
that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, and so these grants that we pull out are what fund them throughout the year. And right now, they're able to work year-round on the Marsh Masters, and in the skid steer, we add a little bit for fuel on the skid steer, but as far as the staffing, that gets covered through these grants.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, and so we just barely purchased that forestry head, so the county will pick that up in the next week or so when it's available.
Excellent. Is that's something they can use just all year long whenever they get out there, see some
Well,
problem areas, or do they need to
can.
wait to?
It depends on dryness, and so the skid steer, it's tracked, and it's heavier than the Marsh Masters per se, like from a pounds per square inch standpoint, so it can't get into the wetter areas. So when the lake goes down in a couple years or whenever that is, they'll be able to get access to more of the shoreline, but for now, they'll try to stay to the dry areas along the upper edges of the shoreline, which is usually where the more
Where those
woody
are.
vegetation is in the first place.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, Walk Care
Projects.
Away. This is a big project that we're working on, and everyone, I think, here is familiar with it. This is kind of the updated map of the entire project. And then phase one is this portion, see the Wacara Meadows here? I guess I have a laser maybe. So this is phase one. It's really, you know, it looks like a smaller portion of it, but it's still a really large project. It ties Vineyard to Orem, to the front runner station, which is just up this street here, is the front runner station. And then right here, this area here is, there's a little cul-de-sac, and then it takes you up to University Parkway. So 2 major access points for active transportation. This portion here will tie us, this phase one portion ties to the south end of Vineyard, takes you out into these wetlands, and then we'll create this spur that heads up and ties into those 2 access points that we talked about. The plan is to look at developing a pond system right here that becomes Orem City Community Fishery. They would be the ones that would manage that. Then potentially as we get cows in here to graze this open, potentially have this as a warm water pond or even just a shallow pond, wet meadow area that can attract the migratory birds that once filled this area. So we're super excited about this. We're getting lots of support. We can use all of your support on this project. We will be requesting funding through the legislature in this upcoming session. Our own Representative Brammer has agreed to run an appropriations bill on this. Representative McKell, who's still currently our representative for the commission, is partnering with Representative Brammer on this bill. And anything that we're not able to get through the legislature, we also have Mountain Land Association of Governments, who is completely on board with this project and willing to kind of come and fill any gaps that we have in our funding for that and see if we can make this happen. Phase one will include, and this is probably far too small to read, but it'll include fencing for the entire project, 2 trailheads, one at each end of the Vineyard side and then also at the Orem side. That'll have a restroom at each of those. By getting the fencing up front, we're able to get cows in there through the Wacara Way nonprofit and get it grazed out and figure out what we have to work with on the entire project, but it'll provide the funding for the trail itself that ties between those 2 projects. And that trail will have some amount of boardwalk, because there are some wet areas through there that we'll have to cross. And we'd like to do it above them rather than in them. It makes it a little bit easier from a permitting standpoint. And then signage and a kind of a series of gates so that we can keep cows where they need to be and allow pedestrian passage, as there will be kind of the spur that goes through and we have to kind of deal with that. So some gates and one-way gates and things like that will all be included in that and allow for some access to a very beautiful part of the town.
How much of this total budget are we asking for in appropriations? All of it, or?
We're asking for all of it.
Oh,
So, and we're still putting in for grant requests on portions of that. You know, fencing, for example, we're gonna ask the Watershed Restoration Initiative for some dollars towards fencing. But because there is a phase 2, if we get all the funding, it allows us to do a little more of phase 2 and stretch those dollars with any of the grants that we're eligible for and receive.
Just a quick question on that. Is the intent that the cows are always there, or is it just to clear the land and then they're removed?
It will be a perpetual grazing easement that we set up in there, but it is not to have them grazed all year long. So they'll come in the spring. There are sections divided up on this project so that the cows will hit each of those areas as hard as they need to be hit. So especially on the southern end of the project, Division of Wildlife will be indicating how much vegetation that they want grazed. And you can, depending on how much time you leave the cows in there, that kind of dictates how low you graze it to. So on this, towards the southern end, because it's gonna be more of a wildlife habitat area, that'll be longer. So shorter grazing, longer material left, so the birds have something to land in and nest in and things like that. So
The reason why I ask is I worry if we're not compounding a problem we already have with the algal blooms. Because you can't, nutrients in cow manure can increase, can add to algal blooms, and so have we looked at that? Is that part of the duration, the rotation, or, I know because the cities, there's regulations on the cities for our water quality of, we have to spend X amount of money to help clean an issue that may or may not still be the city's problem. And I'm just worried that we might be adding to something we're trying to clean up with having the cows there regularly.
There have been cows grazing on the north end, and that's not where the algal blooms have been, just so up on
True,
the edge
but
of
we know the
Citrus.
water,
It does.
the water is very turbid, and
Yeah.
so something could be deposited in the north and will
Yeah.
make it to the south within the same day. I mean, the science hasn't shown that the algal blooms stay or in particular areas because of the nutrients only in that area.
So
Yeah.
super good question. What we know so far is up in Ogden Bay, they're doing a similar grazing program and are not seeing negative results from having cows graze it. One thing that's unique about having it grazed versus, for example, a community park that's like a dog park, where you have dogs coming in that are bringing nutrients from home and then leaving them there on site. The difference is that this vegetation is actually pulling the nutrient out of the water, and then the cows are eating it, and for the most part, they will not be getting in the lake. And so they're using those nutrients to grow, so they take a portion out. So far, at least from what we've learned with the projects up in northern Utah, it has not been having a negative water impact, but it is something that we'll be watching.
Yeah.
Any other?
I mean, I fully appreciate the comment, because it worries us sometimes when we see this. We don't have authority to regulate grazing. I guess it's just a question of scale, really, here. Certainly there will be some nutrients mobilized, perhaps, back into the water. You can think of a cow as equivalent to 10-ish people. So compared to how many cows are out here?
Probably 100 or.
100, so 1,000, compared to the population in Utah County. But it is a contributor, and certainly we are looking at grazing impacts, especially in the southern part of the county, where we have more livestock.
I tease Calvin Crandall all the time, if he'd get his cows off the lake, would be able to, our sewer plant would be a lot less expensive. You guys know Crandall, right? Crandall Farms.
I should just, yeah.
Eric, I have a few
Please.
things on them. So I would echo those concerns over putting cows in the wetlands. The areas that they're being used on the Great Salt Lake are quite different in that it's a lot larger acreage of wetlands, as well as they have a key component of having water control, which helps control the cows and where you put them, and issues with just the grazing itself, but also allows for timing of when you flood an area after the cows have been removed, which can help mitigate the water quality impacts. So the only studies that have been done that we know of so far have been in that environment where they have water control, and they show that there are not short-term impacts to cows in that large system with water control. We don't know if that will be the same case for Utah Lake. And what is known is that grazing helps reduce crab mites in the short term. What is not known is that long term, is going to control the amount, or the moment you remove those cows, if, say, you were concerned about nutrients, that your Phragmites would just come back, rather than having a restoration approach from the beginning, incorporating a lot of different treatments. So I think that it is definitely worthy to proceed with caution in light of all that.
Sure. And kind of the two things that we've done to mitigate the problematic side of it is, one, the decision to have a western fence on the project rather than having an open-ended U. We will put a fence down the side of the trail, so they will be on the upland side of that shoreline trail. And then we'll be doing a pilot this spring with 50 acres or so that we'll fence off and get in there and kind of play it by ear and see how it works. From a management standpoint, long-term, the idea is that this will be the management technique into perpetuity. It's a legacy project for the family that's pushing to have this big project so that their kids and grandkids and into future generations will have the opportunity to work with cows. It's what their heritage is. They did it for 4 or 5 generations and would like to see that opportunity in the future. So we don't see that ending in the near future. So we deal with a lot of Phragmites around the lake, and this will be one way to do that without having to use too much chemical treatment and hopefully a much more sustainable way to treat that in that area. 1,000 acres worth. So an eighth of our shoreline that has Phragmites. Okay, lastly, the Utah Lake Commission offered a small grant, and we realized that it's a small grant. It's $30,000 that folks can apply for, up to half of that each. The deadline on that is coming up here shortly, towards the end of, I think it's the 21st of December. Somewhat of an arbitrary deadline, so if you haven't heard us announce a winner, apply on the 22nd if you'd like. The goal of that grant was to get our Utah Lake shoreline, or get you guys thinking about projects that could be undertaken down there on the shoreline. We have the Utah Office of Outdoor Recreation has a much larger grant, but it requires a 1-to-1 match. So our dollars can be a portion of that match. But if you start thinking about what you could do with our small grant, just scale it up a little bit to what you kind of have on a wish list, and put your application in for that Utah Office of Outdoor Recreation grant. They have regional grants up to $500,000 now, and then the more localized ones are $150,000. So you can really get a fair bit done along the shoreline. I know all of our marinas have master plans for expansion. You can phase in a couple of those projects. So we'd love to see some applications come in for that. One more thing, we have both our chair and our vice chair are leaving their positions of political office at the end of the year, so we are going to be holding elections today. But we got 2 small awards for our chair and vice chair, as they've been phenomenal to work with.
We have our own Phragmites planned.
Thank you.
Didn't fit in the award, unfortunately.
But
Thank you. Wow.
we very much appreciate your hard work on the commission and the extra work that the chair position and vice chair position create. And so I wanted to thank you for that.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Wait, not yet. Very good. Thank you so much. Okay, with our representative here, why don't we go ahead and go to 4, and then we will go back to our business items at the top after that, so we can let him get back to business.
I'm just going to come sit here.
Please, by all means. Welcome.
This is, I don't have a presentation. This is more to start a conversation. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces. I feel like I'm looking at my elementary school principal. His brother was a
You
good
must
friend
have
of
been
mine.
in there a lot to his office.
You guys look so much alike. But really what I'm here today to talk about is just an idea and to get things rolling. It's not related to any legislation that we are looking at for this next session. I think it's a big idea, and it may be obviously stupid. And that's part of why I'm here to talk to you about it, is to see if it's obviously stupid before we start something rolling that's just a bad idea. But I also, so I chair our Utah County caucus for the legislators. And one of our big concerns is we see that as these scientific studies start coming back for the lake, that we've got some significant issues, and I don't know if we have the structure in place to solve those issues, to adequately address what we have coming down the pipe. And so, we do have some examples of recent, basically, we have a state level asset that's being managed by an interlocal agreement from local entities trying to fund it and trying to solve a state level problem. And that's, I don't know that that's been fair, and I don't know that it's the, if we really want to, I think that there's a lot of passion and care that goes into the lake, but is it possible under the current structure to solve the issues that we have? And it may take us a long time under any structure, 50, 80 years, but is it possible? And if we don't feel like it is, what changes do we need to make? And what I've been thinking about as a potential idea is, I had Alan Matheson come and talk to me about the Point of the Mountain Development Authority, and they're able to install infrastructure with tax increment financing, get bonding to do that, things like that. He has a specific vision for what they're doing, and it's not a privatized vision, it's more of a public long-term vision, even though it will involve a lot of private entities. I think that there's a, one of the possibilities that we can do with Utah Lake is transform from the Utah Lake Commission to the Utah Lake Authority, which would be a state level entity with some level of taxing authority and land use authority. And because right now we have, if you want to do something on the lake, and the example that I like to use is, if Vineyard wanted to put piers out into the lake, how do they get that done? Who do they go talk to? Is it even possible? Is anyone going to feel like they can make the final call on that?
It'd need a lot of peer pressure.
They need a lot of pressure. But, and that's not necessarily, as I look at it, I'm like, oh, that'd be kind of cool. Some piers that you could drive food trucks out on and turn around and go back and do some summer activities, things like that. Okay, that's kind of interesting. But getting it done would be very difficult from a bureaucratic standpoint. I don't know that you could. And maybe it's not a good idea, it's just an example. But, the conversation that I wanted to get started is, does it make sense to do something along those lines? And then, I would want to get some initial feedback to try to get an early draft out sometime in the spring after the legislative session, and then let everyone tear it apart and have everybody tell us what their main concerns are, what their, what needs to be protected for their, everyone, if we go to the Central Utah, water district, they're going to say, oh, water quantity. If you touch our water quantity, we're coming after you. That's going to be their response. But I am concerned that the problem is bigger than the shovel that we have. That's really the concern, and I wanted to get your feedback on that idea initially, and whether it's something that's even worth trying to start to pursue.
I totally agree. I think half the time we're trying to fight a forest fire with a garden hose. At least we're working on fighting it, but I would be an advocate for it. I think the lake is a very valuable resource our state has that we're unable to capitalize on because there's no legislature, or there's no body, there's no authority, as you would.
It's a huge asset that, because of the way that it was, the way that things have developed around it, it's turned into a liability as opposed to an asset.
Right. Well, and if you look at all the development around it, from Vineyard all the way around over to Saratoga Springs, there's so much that could happen. It could be so it could be a gem for our state,
Yeah.
regardless of how it happened. I mean, we've obviously seen that the Utah Lake Restoration Project, which is crazy awesome, and, you know, depending on your point of view, but at least something in that direction.
Yeah.
We found anywhere, but there's no way that happens
I mean, I,
with this.
you know, for example, what I worry about
Can't get
is
lakes.
if we needed to, if the scientific projects come back and the recommendations come back and there's a significant capital investment needed, how are we going to do that? You know, is there a bonding mechanism to do it? Do we have a stable enough, you know, source of revenue to get the bonds necessary to purchase whatever equipment is needed? And I have no interest in prescribing how things are, you know, how things are done necessarily and what needs to be done. You know, I want that to be this body or the Utah Lake Authority, but, yeah.
Brady, how do they do it in, with other lakes? Are there examples
don't.
that we can look at?
There's not a lot of
Not even
examples
one.
out there, and a lot of that is because there's not a lot of lakes with such, that are this big. And, I mean, we could go up to the, I mean, the,
Great Lakes.
you know, around Chicago and those areas, but it's kind of a different atmosphere, you know, it's, but most lakes don't have this size of lake surrounded by this much population. It's not very common, and so I don't have a good answer for that. I've been looking, but I don't see that anyone has. I mean, the Utah Lake Commission was patterned largely after the Bear Lake Commission, I believe, you know, it's originally. But you know, we're kind of a different animal than that in a lot of ways, and so.
Also, Brady, so, I mean, here we have a diverse group that comes together to look at lake issues. So if this authority is comprised, because of all the different property owners. I mean, we have private property, we have cities who own property right next to the lake, we have the state that owns under the lake. I mean, there's a lot of entities still, and how do you keep the authority from getting out of hand? I guess we've seen that with the UTA, right? And all of the different issues that happen there, and we would want to learn from that example of maybe how we structure ourselves going forward.
The structure of the board is important.
Well, I
is
think
to-
I was gonna say, I think we've even seen that even with the point of the Mountain Authority, honestly.
Right.
Because
Right.
they are going in and making decisions where they're not paying attention to Wasatch Front Regional Council nor MAG, some of the things, nor some of the things that the different cities surrounding them are doing. So I think one of the things that's been important about this body is that it is that local representation. And a lot of times you get into those authorities,
different.
and all of a sudden the cities have no say anymore. And that's a huge, huge issue.
Well, I think you have to have, you know, a certain percentage from different constituencies. So for example, you're gonna end up having a certain amount from COG or, you know, whatever it may be, that, you know, how many seats come from that body or however you wanna do it. I'm not, you know, I don't have, I think that's one of the key considerations. And especially once you get pen to paper and put out a proposal, then you find out where everyone really, what structure will work and what won't, what people can live with and what they can't. But I agree that the local representation is important. At some point, you know, doing this, you do end up with a body that at some point has real authority to do something that, you know,
Yeah,
you may
that's
not
the
like
double edge
at
of
some
the
point.
sword.
And
Yeah,
and
that's it.
I'm not pretending like that won't ever happen. I think it is likely to happen at some point in certain circumstances, but, you know, what can you do to kind of create the correct checks and balances
There,
around it?
is there any, I mean, the most logical existing taxing or body authority is the county commission. Is there something that would fit within that structure where that does overlap
Well,
pretty much, or is that too?
It may. The problem that I see with it is it's a state level asset. And then you're asking the county to take care of and fund the state level entity. And, you know, and so that's the state level, you know, really property.
Yeah.
And that's one of the concerns that I have. And, you know, if you can, you know, what I kind of view is if we can get something where, right now we have, I think it's a 35% match for anything that's raised, right, by the state. Is that still correct? I was looking at the original legislation.
That's how it's balanced.
That's how it's balanced. If you can keep that 35% match with the new entity, the state's now pitching in a lot more because the new entity is able to raise a lot more as well. And, you know, that's gonna be the political fight on our hands, is to keep that or raise it. You know, but that's something that I think that the Utah County legislators would push pretty hard for, you know, to try to help with that. I mean, it's a lot of the water quality issues are, you know, decades of misuse, you know, and so there's going to be a brunt that falls on Utah County, and it's really, you know, we have the easiest access to this asset, but it does need to be fairly heavily subsidized from the state.
If I can just speak to the subsidization question, we do have financing vehicles to help communities with wastewater and stormwater infrastructure capital investments. We're thrilled to offer Provo, I think, a pretty good package.
This package.
$77 million, I think.
77.5 Erica.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
$2 million in grant at a 0.5%.
Exactly, I will not forget that.
But with that deal, we basically have that and the one other big one we did last year. Our funds, we're gonna have a kind of cash flow issue in the next 4 years. So we only got $20 million for the rest of the state for the next 5 or 6 years to spend. So we're actively looking for ways to, I don't know that we need a long-term solution, but we do see, especially for Utah Lake communities, Utah County communities, a need to help finance some of the growth and wastewater infrastructure that's coming here. So I've got a couple ideas we've been floating around. Obviously, that's just a piece of what we're talking about.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the general idea, and I wanted to make sure it got out to you guys as soon as I could, so that, you know, you can think about it and figure out if, you know, if it's an obviously bad idea, I'd rather hear it now, you know, because eventually ideas take a life of their own, and so, you know, I'd love to hear your feedback. What I will likely do eventually is, before we get it draft out, we would want to try to get short white papers from each of anyone who wants to give it to us of, you know, what are your concerns, what can you live with, what can't you live with, you know, what do we need to take into account, because it's too big of an issue for anyone to grasp all of the elements simultaneously. You know, it's going to take a little bit of help on that end. You know, I know that I'm certain that Saratoga Springs has some unique things that are different than everyone else because they have so much lakefront property that's developed. You know, the Vineyard is going to have their concerns with how much they've invested on their lakefront side, or that they're investing right now. You know, so we need to hear all of that, and we'll get kind of a form out for everyone to let us know, and you can add to it or just disregard it and give us whatever you want. But that's kind of the thinking on it. One thing that I would say that I wanted to talk about is on the undeveloped portions to the south and southwest, particularly, for example, Mosita, which is largely church-owned, it may make sense to include some of that land into a land use area, into this entity that can have a little bigger long-term vision for how to develop that. You know, because eventually if you are having a road that intersects across it, and you can have some recreational and tourism facilities along that side, that could be a pretty big deal down the line, that may need kind of the bigger vision with the lake as a whole. Yeah.
So, but we have so many different, when we think of scope of projects and this board coming together, I can see the benefits that there could be, especially financially, making sure that the dollars are spent wisely. I mean, Eric spends a lot of his time going after all sorts of grants, and it seems like that's what we do. We say, oh, we got grant here, we're doing this, we're partnering with these people. It would help. But again, do we lose anything in how big the board is or how small it is, because we're looking at recreation, and we're looking at local entities and the shoreline trails. We're looking at water quality, which we discussed before you got here. there's a lot of different people who have their finger in this lake pie. And making sure that all of those needs are still met, because I think that's one of the fears of having a smaller entity in control. It helps financially, but is the voice still heard?
Yeah, and I think that's a valid concern, and it's always going to come down to some degree. I don't know that I can dispel those fears entirely. Is the potential benefit better than the status quo? You know, given those risks, and you know, I think that the mission or the intent language will matter. So, for example, if I were to put it off the top of my head, I would say we start with water quantity, as you know, preserve the quantity, restore the quality, maximize recreation and connectivity, and trails for recreation around the lake, and then maximize economic benefit. If I were to, and that's probably where I would start. That might not be the right priority. That there might be more things to add to it, but that's, you know, and that mission statement and whether that board is adhering to it, you know, that's gonna bear on it. So, you know, I think that there will be a lot of, if this were to move forward, I think that the structuring, the makeup of the board will be a, you know, something that needs to be done very thoughtfully to address and to mitigate those concerns. And yeah, that's probably one of the biggest things.
I guess one of my concerns would be how broad authority it has. Like, does it have enough authority to go in and tell the sewer plants in all these cities that the water quality is not good enough? We're going to go above and beyond the state and federal requirements for agriculture. I know that fertilizer is a big thing, but are they going to have authority to go tell the farmers and the cherry farmers and that they can't put the fertilizer down? So I'd look at how much authority they're really going to have.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I think you want to make sure that the box is very clear as to what, you know, what they can and can't do. And so I agree. I don't necessarily want them to be a mini Department of Water Quality. And so, you know, it's kind of, yeah.
But I could see, you know, value, and we already get value from this meeting us recommendations and providing support. I think having local elected officials participate in these decisions is critical.
Yeah. I think one of my big concerns is just government bloat in general. As you create an authority like that, all of a sudden those become paid positions a lot of times. And one of the things that, you know, we do very well here is that it's part of our council positions and mayoral positions already. It's not additional funding that then takes away from funding for the lake. So I think that if we look at this, I like the idea of being able to kind of have I'm going to call it an authority mechanism in helping through the approval process for, you know, recreation and for development and whatever else along the lake. I get really concerned when we start creating another full authority body and all of the financial stipulations that come along with it. That's concerning to me.
I agree. I think it's worth exploring. And maybe there's a tool that we haven't used because we don't know it exists. But I think we need to be very careful to not lose the sincerity of the group and our purposes. And this group is very sincere. We come together and we don't think of the bureaucracy that could come about from that. We work together. So, but I do think it's worth taking a look at.
Your experience with authorities, do you get more private dollars when you create an authority? And if you look at, when you started off your conversation, you talked about the point of the mountain. And there's obviously, that's not government money at work there. That's somebody else's money. So our state we're not having to flip the bill.
This is a little different because I don't think that it is private dollars. At least not initially.
Yeah.
You know, it would take quite a bit of investment to get the recreation site up high enough to where there's private dollars and to develop the infrastructure to where you're getting development that would bring in private dollars. I think that this is a little different than the point of the mountain. You know, that one basically they're trying to build another downtown.
Yeah. Well,
without
there's
my
a lot
restrictions.
of private dollars, and, you know, I would say I'd be more of a minimalist, meaning I don't like, I like what you're saying, salaries, and next thing you know, we've got this big thing that doesn't get anything done anyway.
Mhm.
The reason we wanna do it is so something gets done, but if all it does is create a place for some money to get.
Yeah, I'm not
profit,
interested
it's
in,
not great.
I don't love the idea of a new entity, I
Yeah.
agree.
If you get it
The
private
problem that I-
funded, that'd be awesome.
The problem that I have is, you know, for as good of the intentions as an interlocal agreement can have, it's not anyone's true mission, you know, and the dollars that come into it are side dollars, not mission dollars. Because each of you have your cities, and you have a mission for those dollars. And this is just a side project within your mission or your cities. You can do as good a job as you want on this interlocal agreement, you know, between everyone, but your mission isn't Utah Lake overall, like your primary mission. And that's, you know, that's one of the concerns that I have, is that there's somewhat of a diffusion of responsibility of providing support, but there's a fear, whether recognized or not, that the problem of Utah Lake will envelop what your mission really is as mayors or as council members. You know, that it could eat your budgets up if you dug in to do it too much. And so that's, you know, that diffusion of responsibility structurally is a problem. I'm not saying that this solution is worth, you know, it's worth it, but that is a problem that we're dealing with.
I would be against an authority like this simply on the basis that certainly any appropriations, you know, that come with it to this commission or an authority would certainly add to that, to the scope that could be accomplished here. But an authority like that, one, it would then be a state thing, which means taxes, because there's no other funding mechanism other than increased taxes on our citizens, and because it's a state authority on state citizens. And so we now have people in Washington County paying taxes. Granted, selfishly, that helps our lake, but I don't see why they would need to pay taxes for something that they may never recreate at. It doesn't involve them, plus the fact that you now have representatives and senators from around the state, that even though it may be an authority, we have only a limited number of Utah County representatives and senators that could be outvoted, in which case it is still a side or a secondary, even though it's an authority, we now have we've gone from local control to state control, and it still isn't gonna get the funding it needs because the other representatives and senators will outvote our Utah County legislators.
Well, let me address that briefly. I mean, one of my concerns, number one, they're already getting funding from other areas. You're already getting funding from other areas of the state. People in Washington County are already getting funding from Utah Lake. You know, that's already there. If the scope of what needs to be done on Utah Lake is too big, it can't get done through one-time funding and appropriations requests. We don't have enough political capital to make that happen. I mean, when we talk about the Arches project, they're talking about $7 billion worth of, or whatever the number is, it changes every time I hear it. But, you know, in the billions to remediate the lake. And a lot of that is kind of making a series of islands and things like that. But if the problem is as big as we think it is in terms of the cost to fix it, we can have as much local control as we want, and we have no opportunity to actually fix that problem. So if we want to fix the problem, I'm not sure that the structure, our current structure, allows us to do it.
I wonder if we might do something a little bit more akin to what we do with MAG, where MAG doesn't have taxing authority, but the state funds that have been set aside through, you know, road taxes and whatever else, but those then come in and are distributed through that body. So it's still that complete local control on which projects, you know, the mayors talk and agree, and it's which projects are gonna go forward, and we've got a TAC committee that helps us, just like we've got our science panel here or whatever. But it might be something more akin to that, where we still maintain that local control over what projects are gonna be done.
Well, and the concern that you run into is because it is a state asset, if you are the local control side of controlling a state asset makes it harder. Like that's kind of the problem now. If you have local control through the board makeup of that, then you're getting a lot of that. But if the local control is I guess on MAG, you're getting, and I'm trying to remember all of the funding mechanisms for MAG. It's been a little bit since I broke that down. But you're getting a portion from the state, you're getting a portion from the BNC, taxing that comes into that. What's the percentage that's coming from the state for MAG? And the other issue, the problem that I see on doing it just like MAG is that MAG is one of 4 entities that are substructures of UDOT. And they do have local control, but there's somewhat of there's always a battle between each of those 4 to get funds. There's nothing like this in the state. There's no local funding entity that are in other areas spread out evenly throughout the state. And so you don't have that jockeying for it, and you wouldn't have it. You just have, we're giving money to Utah County. And that without that self-interest of different areas of the state to all cooperate and play nice, it makes it a lot harder to do. I think that if you can get the agreement that they have some taxing authority, and then it's matched by the state automatically, we don't have to go back for one-time funds and appropriations every time. It automatically occurs, and it's a lot easier lift politically for us to get done. If we can do it somewhat like MAG, I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but I'm not sure that the power structure necessarily aligns in the same way, because MAG is one of 4 statewide, statewide groups building road that are all building roads. There's not lakes near every major area that.
Well, Utah Lake is a state asset, it's not a Utah County.
Well, and I'm not sure it's 100% a state asset though either, because
Well, it
in
could
reality,
be.
St.
I don't
George
know
could
what it
care,
is.
St. George could care less about Utah Lake, let me
But
tell you.
Well,
I don't know, I like
every
the
one of our
water,
state parks is the
body
same
of
thing,
water in
with
St.
people
George.
that live nearby
They're nice.
taking more advantage of it, but it technically is a state asset.
Yeah.
And, it may be utilized more by Utah County, and we may have abused it more, the Utah County population, because of the wastewater going into it, but it is a state level asset. We had to go to the Supreme Court to fight for it.
Yeah,
So-
it could have been sovereignized altogether.
Yeah, and it was defined by the Supreme Court as a state level asset.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and that's one question I wrote down, and this may be for offline talking to understand it more, but when did that take place? Because my question is,
That was in the
at
late
what point?
80s.
In the 80s?
Yeah, when they got the Supreme Court decision.
I was gonna say,
Because my question is, when was it defined as a state asset? And did this body exist before that definition?
No, it didn't. It was claimed as a state asset much earlier than that, but it was the late, I think it was 86 or so, when the Supreme Court decision came down.
So then the question would be, if it were defined as a state asset then, and this body didn't exist, why wasn't there a state authority created at that point rather than a local entity?
Yeah,
Because we were just a bunch of farmers then.
Well, I mean, it's a basic question, and
Or-
and again, it's not the conspiracy theorist, but if the state didn't deem it important in the 80s to be able to have an authority and to manage, to tax, to take care of, why now? What is it that's changed?
I think that the population growth has put a lot of pressures on our water quality and water quantity. And it wasn't as much of a consideration. People care deeply about water then, just like they do now. But in terms of managing the resource, it's becoming more and more important as our population continues to grow.
And it's used more as a recreational opportunity than it was. In the 80s, no one go on
I
the lake.
mean, I went more in the
So-
80s than I have.
I was
I
gonna
was
say.
gonna
I
say, yeah, it was
disagree.
used.
I'd
It
like
was
to know
used
from
a
Laurie
lot.
what- I think our recreation numbers are down, if you look at population growth versus recreation usage.
I think
It's
I have a
horrible.
t-shirt, I
And-
think I have a t-shirt that says ski
Yeah.
the scum.
Ski the scum, yeah.
Yeah,
I,
I do too.
I think so, if you look at,
It's just for
people
Utah
do the
Lake, not
boating,
everywhere
it's
else.
not.
It was in Utah, actually, it was here too.
Everywhere else is.
Yeah.
I still go back to the problem of having state control versus local control. Housing has been an issue, and everyone's been concerned about housing up until now, using the same talking points you just used. Now we have more, and we have growth, and we have the legislature saying, cities, you will do these things on this list, or
For what it's
else.
worth, I voted against that.
We represent the you will.
You see the concern though is.
I do,
You know, I see a state entity or
Yeah.
state authorization authority
Yeah.
then doing a similar thing. Cities, you will do this or else you won't get, and that was an awful quid pro quo, again, separate issue.
Yeah.
You will do this or we won't give you something that you actually deserve regardless of this other issue. And so my concern for my city is, okay, great, now as a city, I now have another state entity that will say, you will do on this list, or else we will force you.
Yeah.
It may be a state asset, but the burden on the local communities, I think, far outweighs the benefits. And yet, I agree, basically, I agree.
Yeah,
It's a
this-
small shovel for what we need.
Yeah.
I like the fact that we can all pick up that shovel and get to work versus the state saying, no, here's the tool you're gonna use and you'll use it when and how we say you use it.
Well, and I think maybe, I think to some degree you're kind of, it may be, you may be thinking a little bigger than what I'm kind of talking about.
True, but government has a tendency.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
To do
no.
so.
And I don't think any of those are not valid concerns. I think they're totally valid, and, that's kind of why I want to talk to you guys, is to, before it goes, down too far down the line. But what I view as the likely methodology is the entity would be empowered to control the use of the asset, being Utah Lake, and any lands that are specifically put within their purview. So if you decided to cut in along the southwest or south portion, where it's fairly undeveloped, and I don't know if that's a good idea or not, then it would have that authority as well. So in terms of land use authority, that's what we would have. In terms of taxing authority, you're probably either looking at, in the current climate, I wouldn't recommend property taxing authority, but I do think that it may be appropriate to do a Utah Lake remediation fee through the sewer districts or wastewater, or the water runoff, stormwater, stormwater drainage. That would probably be, in my mind, that makes sense as a funding mechanism, and it would increase the cost for Utah County residents. It would, but if we're going to actually pay to deal with the lake, it's got to come from somewhere, and there's not going to be enough state resources to do that. There just won't be. But you can get, if you can get a commitment from the state that they'll match a certain portion, then you can start projecting out, and you can build a plan out with local control to say, yeah, our people can handle this. If you've got that on the board, here's our 80-year plan. We're going to do it little by little. We're going to buy a few dredgers. Now we have a funding mechanism to pay for those. We can start doing that. We're going to enter into an agreement with MAG that we're going to develop our islands in this way to basically build a causeway across. We're going to get some funds from UDOT related to that. We can enter into those agreements. That's kind of what I'm thinking. And I don't know that other than that fee that could be charged to residents, I don't see the land use authority really kicking against any of the cities too much. I do see some with regards to how you deal with trails around the lake. I think that there would be major resistance for eminent domain authority to build the trail around the lake. But if you can do interlocal agreements, I think that everyone here already has kind of that, you're going to build a trail along the lake on undeveloped land as you develop. I think that's kind of a thing, but I don't know that you can get eminent in on it, it would be pretty difficult politically.
That's already a law that's on the books.
It's around the
Can't
books.
do that.
Well, yeah, but
Yeah.
we would be writing a law, and
Yeah.
I know that the laws are on the books, but in doing this, it would be legislation, and you can change the law, but
Yeah.
I'm saying it would be difficult to do it,
I don't think most of us have the appetite for that anyway.
especially in Saratoga Springs.
So a couple of thoughts, and that is.
We already have the trails,
Because
though.
I really believe what you're talking about is sincere. I really, I sense that, but I would ask, what's on the idea? Was there some outside pressure? Was there people, is it, you just were driving by the lake and you thought, we really need to do something with the lake? And
This was talking with the other legislators is, what's going on with the lake? They agree that the Lake Commission does a great job, but we're like, can they really solve this problem? Do we really believe that they have the resources to solve it? And is there a structural way to address that? And, I've had, it's been something that the legislators have said, we want to talk about the lake when we do our caucus meetings, and what can we do? And, the idea was, it hasn't come from any lobbyist, it hasn't come from anyone. It's just, we're looking around at what are the tools that we have. And, this was a proposal on it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Good discussion, thanks, Wayne.
Thank you all.
Seems to me, given what we were talking about earlier, the idea that, like taking MAG for example, the idea of that there is an authority above them that's a statewide authority, UDOT, but yet local control with MAG. Is there anywhere in the state that there might be other entities that were similar, that we could still have a board that had some land use and taxing authority as a MAG-type organization underneath something that's already established?
The Utah Lake Commission.
Right. Well, that's what I'm meaning. Is there
I mean, if the Lake
is there
Commission.
that taxing authority somewhere above the umbrella that we could fit under that could keep some local
I mean,
control?
an alternative methodology would be for each of the members of the Utah Lake Commission to increase the taxes in their cities specifically for lake remediation and put that into the pot for Utah Lake.
Well, that's not going to happen.
But is everyone going to do that uniformly? And is it going to be administered fairly? I mean, and that's really,
But that would be the same on taxing if you did a toilet tax or whatever you want to call it. I mean, this is the same thing. Not necessarily going to have the same tax throughout all of the different sewer districts, and you're also going to have a lot of uproar there too, so.
well, if you said we're going to do a $2 per month per connection for any sewer district that
Discharges.
delivers into the lake, that has effluent going into the lake, that's uniform throughout.
A lot of our rural county isn't on sewer.
Mhm.
Like we're in they're septic. So,
One thing that you could do is you could say that the entity doesn't control, I think it's the same thing. I don't think that it's kind of like two sides of the same coin, but you could say that they can, that they could assess a fee through the sewer district, and that's the taxing methodology. But I don't know, if there's different ways to do it.
Sorry, I know you want to.
Yeah, we
get
got
here,
going.
but- So essentially though, and just, I know these are initial thoughts, but, so the local people would be paying half the bill through some kind of an increase. It's going to be an increase in your sewer rates or something. And then the state at large would be another mechanism to help fund that. So
Yeah, and I don't know what the percentages break down. Right now, it's 35%, and we try to get it as high as we could, that the state, also contributes in, but the idea would be that because Utah County residents have been using the lake as their resource for effluent discharge, and that's to some degree the source of a lot of the lake remediation needs, that they probably pay a higher price than the state as a whole. But the state would pitch in because it is their asset.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure I understand because, you know, let's say that our study suggests the need to raise the level of treatment for wastewater treatment plants. And we have one here today.
I would view that as your deal.
Sure, but so then, you know, each city and district would have to raise rates at different levels, because we have varying levels of treatment today. You know, there's some facilities that haven't been upgraded for 50 years, and there's some that were upgraded too. So that's gonna be passed on to ratepayers differentially based on, right? And then you would, the extra money would be not to fund the wastewater infrastructure, but would be to fund all the other stuff.
He's
the
talking about a
recreation
specific,
and the
he's talking about a
dredging.
specific line item for remediation, nothing to do with actual
With-
sewer.
with
That would have to come through a
treatment.
sewer
Okay.
district. It would be separate,
Yeah.
so,
And
yeah.
that's one way of skinning the cat. There's lots of other ways. I'm not saying that's the way. But I would be hesitant to do any kind of generalized property assessment at this point.
That's
I
not
think
gonna
it could be a treatment.
Yeah.
And as a mayor, I'm very hesitant to raise sewer rates, but I don't have a problem. I mean, even just that, I think they all
If you
know.
went to most residents in Utah County and you said, we need to really start looking at Utah Lake, I'd be surprised if most of them were like, yeah, you're probably, I think most of them would probably recognize the need to deal with Utah Lake a little bit better than we have to.
Yeah, have to throw it out as a proposition.
Okay,
Get it out of our hands,
And
put
I'd
it on
be,
theirs.
I'd be fine with us, you know, maybe we can get the, you know, on the next ballot, we could
Yeah.
get the county to put it as a question.
Yep. I think it's a great idea. And then it's not just us making it, even in this room, we have variations in our opinions of what needs to be done. I think you do. Put it on the ballot, that'd be awesome.
I'd be fine with that. But the only issue is you don't get your answer until November of next year.
Right.
And then you're on a pretty quick timeline, so you'd have to develop a lot of it beforehand.
well, to ask that kind of question, you'd want something pretty detailed anyway, so they would know what they were talking about, because if you just say, who wants to clean up the lake, everybody's gonna say yes. So if you don't have very specific criteria set forward and what that entails, then that's not gonna be a useful question anyway. So you'd have to have a lot of that set up already. Okay, thank you very much. Let's get moving forward pretty quickly on this. Let's jump back up really quickly and take care of our action items. We'll handle them all at once. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. We will handle the first two at once, unless there are any problems with that. Any questions on the governing board minutes? Any questions on the monthly financials?
The
Yes.
only thing, I wasn't there, but I just noticed in reading them on, this is a technicality, but on the next date for today's meeting, it had September instead of today's date.
Okay.
So it's just a typo.
Perfect, we'll get that fixed. Thank you, appreciate that, Lori.
Sorry.
Okay, no, that's great. Okay, any other items on financials or minutes? Okay, I will entertain a motion.
I move that we approve items in section 2, items A and B as noted.
Second?
Got a first and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good, thank you. Eric, federal surplus.
Okay, real simply, as part of this Walkera Way project, we are interested in figuring out inexpensive ways to manage this project. There's probably a need for a couple different machines, sort of a backhoe type machine and maybe a farm type tractor. And in doing some research, there is a federal program, a federal surplus program that is administered through this Utah State Surplus Office. And if we pass a resolution that says we're okay being eligible for those surplus items, then that puts us on the list up at the State Office of Surplus, and it allows us to acquire machines. The federal surplus is free to any other government entity that is on this list. But the State Surplus Office charges 3% of whatever the value of that item is. So a $100,000 tractor becomes a $3,000 tractor to us, and we pay for shipping wherever it happens to be in the state, or we go pick it up on a trailer or something like that. But this would allow us to acquire a couple of those machines that would be helpful for this project at a low to minimal cost. It's the sort of thing that we could probably just add into one of our grants, or as we see something pop up, maybe we keep a capital projects fund budget line item in our budget, as we have in the past, to acquire a couple of these things. The contracting of that, how it's laid out, we can address later, but for now, it would be nice to get on that list and see the types of machines that are on there, and bring it to the board when we see something that we're interested in, and see if that's an appropriate acquisition. So,
I think this is a no-brainer, add another tool to our toolbox, right? So I think this makes any sense.
so
Okay,
we would just need to say yes by resolution. We will have our chair sign the document that puts us on that state list.
okay. Any concerns, questions?
We're not approving funds, we're just saying go look at it.
We're gonna go get on the
Right?
list.
We're not, you
Yep.
can't spend money you don't have.
Right.
Yeah, he's gonna come back and say, I
I
want
need
this
money.
piece of
Yeah.
equipment, it's this much.
Cool, sounds great.
Okay, very good. Okay, at this time, I'll accept a motion.
I'm in.
Okay, very
I'll
good.
second.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion?
Do we need to draft the resolution, or
The
is it?
resolution is
It's
already
a-
drafted.
Yep, by the
It
state.
comes from the State Office of Surplus. It just needs signatures on it. That
Okay,
says that
So
this
the
board,
motion is for that resolution?
For that resolution
Correct.
to allow me
Accept
to
the
sign it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Very good. Okay. Any other further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good, motion carries. Thank you. Okay, nominations and elections for board chair and vice chair. So obviously, this will be taking over in January, at our first meeting in January. Chair and vice chair have, in addition to our quarterly board meeting, their executive council meetings, we have about once a month. Chair also, and then vice chair, if chair's not around or whatever, runs the meetings, obviously, signs any of the,
You have to work really hard for this.
yeah.
You eat a lot of bagels, and there are a lot of,
Yeah, but we get the opportunity to work a little bit behind the scenes on some of the items, get updates, and also go talk to, for example, when I just blanked, the Walkera Way project started coming in, we got to talk to them a little bit beforehand and get some information. So just things like that where we kind of help head. So at this time, I'll take any nominations. Let's go ahead and do chair and then vice chair. I'll take any nominations for chair at this time.
I'll nominate Mayor Frost of American Fork. as
Mayor
the
Frost
chair.
for American Fork.
I'll second that.
You'll second that? Excellent.
Sure you would. Like Springfield.
Okay. Anybody else interested or wanted to nominate anybody else? Excellent. At this time, I'll take a vote of acclamation then. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I came to this meeting just so I wouldn't be.
We're glad you dressed
Who's
up.
not here?
Thank you. Okay. Vice chair at this time. I taking any nominations at this time? And I'd actually love to have somebody from the north, somebody from the south. So I would love to nominate Craig Jensen from Springville if we can.
I'll second that.
That's pretty funny.
We're gonna move the meeting to 8, so we're not, no, just kidding.
And that's something you guys can discuss. Also, your executive committee, you definitely want to, talk about when you're going to meet as executive committee. Any other nominations for vice chair?
Any other volunteers?
Any other volunteers? Yeah. Okay. Very good. At this time, then we will vote by acclamation again. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. Thank you very much, Councilman Jensen and Mayor Frost, for
I'm
being
gonna
willing to
dust off
serve.
the place for my plaque right now.
Very good. Okay. Thank you very much. We
I'm gonna
will,
make one comment too.
please, by all means.
I just wanted to say, I also recognize we've had a number of individuals that have been consistently dedicated, coming to every meeting. And a lot of mayors as well as city council members. And I really think that's been a critical aspect of connecting this group to your communities. And I really appreciate the support for many of you that have come from quite a ways to be part of this. And just a special thanks to all of you that have been part of this last while that I've been able to work with you. So thank you very much.
Yeah, it's been nice to see a lot get done in the last while, too. We've made some good progress. So, thank you. Okay. Okay, let's jump back to number 5 quickly. we've got the Provo River Delta Restoration Project, Melissa.
You know, I'll do it. I'll just pass it out.
All right, well, I think most of you are familiar with some of the background on the Delta project, so rather than go through slides that a lot of you have seen before, just passing around our latest newsletter that came out about 3 weeks ago. Some of you might already have it. If you don't want to keep the extra copy, I'll take it at the end, but we have plenty. But I did just want to pass that around so you could refer to the map that's on the inside page, which represents our final project boundary. When we were here, I think in June, and updated you all, we had just finished our acquisition of our final piece of property that we had to acquire. So on the map in the newsletter, the black hatched area is our final project boundary. It includes property that we have acquired as the mitigation commission, and also a few parcels that are currently still in Provo City ownership. We're working very closely with Provo City on a number of different overlapping efforts, working with their construction on the View Parkway and how our project has affected that, and we have some agreements in place on that, and there's many agreements to sort out as we go through with this project. So, but essentially that will be the area that will be considered part of the Delta project. And we are ready to start construction in March is our plan. We have the funding set, and when I get back to the office, I'll be sending some follow-up materials to the Corps of Engineers for our wetland permit, so we're kind of getting those pieces lined up so that we're ready to start some excavation in the spring. And just to review some of the main elements of the project, it's located down at the mouth of the Provo River near Utah Lake State Park. We'll be diverting the majority of the Provo River flows into this restored delta area north of the existing channel. The existing channel will remain in place, and we will be delivering a small amount of flow to that channel continuously, putting a small dam at the downstream end to maintain a constant water elevation so that it still has good recreational value year-round rather than fluctuating like it does now with the lake. And as you can see on the map, there's a number of recreation features involved with the project. And those are some of the very exciting parts of the project. It's also an important element in the recovery of the endangered June sucker. And the idea is that we need this rearing habitat with more of the wetland marsh, the productive, broader floodplain area that really is connected to Utah Lake rather than channelized the way the current outlet is in its existing condition. I do want to point out on the map the orange line that is the Skipper Bay Trail along Skipper Bay Dike right now. The northern portion of that, where it's a dotted line, we're going to be removing that portion because we have to lower Skipper Bay Dike to reconnect the river to the lake with those outlet channels. But a new trail will be created all along the red line, the berm that will be the southern boundary of our project area. And so that'll create a loop trail opportunity. One of the projects from a recreation standpoint that's kind of the farthest along right now is the Delta Gateway Park that we are partnering with Provo City on. We have a funding agreement for the design of that park. The designs should be wrapping up probably February, March is the time frame we're looking at, and we're hoping to construct the first phase of that park next summer, probably later in the summer, early fall. And we can't complete the whole park until we've diverted the river and can connect the river-related features of that park until the tail end of our overall project. But we're hoping to get something that the public can enjoy while the rest of the construction is continuing. So next year, in terms of what you'll see activity with, the majority of our work will be kind of in the western area of the project, and we'll be accessing for construction off of Boat Harbor Drive, which is in a section that's currently closed because of the Lakeview Parkway work. So in terms of like impactfulness to existing recreation and so forth, we'll be kind of out of the public view to to a large degree. There'll be some increased traffic with trucks hauling on Center Street and that sort of thing. But we'll have some signage that we'll put in place. Folks that are using Skipper Bay Dyke Trail will probably be the most able to view what's going on. And that trail will not be taken out until later in our construction schedule. And right now we're looking at, we've been hoping for a 4-year construction schedule. In the last couple months, we've gotten some geotechnical results back that is going to mean it's going to push into a 5-year construction time frame. So we're looking at projected completion in 2024. And a lot of the final recreation features will be at the tail end because we kind of have to get all the river channels established, the berm solidified, and then kind of a lot of the area revegetated as we go because it will be very wet to get back out there. Of course, the lake is high, which is great, but not great for our construction. So we'll hopefully it won't be too wet out there to do our work. So some of those final recreation features, other than that first phase of the Delta Gateway Park, you aren't going to see until 2023. 2024, the extra year is largely associated with the small downstream dam. It's very soft sediments, we're in the lake bed, so it needs quite a bit of time to kind of load and settle before we can put in the concrete structures, otherwise that stuff would crack. And so that kind of has to sit there after we've initially diverted the river into the Delta area for a while, and so that's what pushes us into 2024. So that's kind of a recap of, I think, most of what I wanted to mention. I think one of the things, just tying to some of your earlier discussions today, regards to Phragmites treatment and restoring vegetation around the lake, I think our project is going to be an interesting research opportunity. You know, and Division of Wildlife has been very involved with the project, as well as Utah County and Provo City in particular. We're working with the state park as well, and many other cooperators are also involved, obviously the commission. We're in touch with Eric on a regular basis. But I think it's going to be a cool opportunity. We're doing very aggressive revegetation, and one of the things that isn't as commonly done is attempting to establish some of the submerged aquatic vegetation by actually planting it rather than just seeing what comes in naturally. So we'll see how that goes. We'll be kind of putting that into our first ponds next fall and adapting as we go through the different revegetation process every growing season throughout construction. And, you know, we're not connected directly to shoreline yet, but there's plenty of frag where we are connecting to Utah Lake. And I think it's going to be a good opportunity to kind of work in Forestry Fire State Lands and everybody to kind of see if we get that vegetation in quickly of what we want, how does that help us battle the frag? It will continue to be a thing long term, but I'm excited. You know, I always enjoy coming to this group. You guys have so much great stuff going on, and your enthusiasm for the lake is really refreshing. And so I hope that there's some learning we can do from this project that can benefit the other areas of the lake as well.
Thank you. That's great.
Excellent, thank you.
Anyone have any questions or anything?
Yeah.
at this point?
Any questions or comments on the restoration? I'm looking forward to seeing some of that information, seeing how the revegetation works. That'll be very intriguing.
Yeah, so I'll keep kind of pushing for that. We can see who can get involved.
So when we get to a certain spot, I would really like us to do a field trip.
Tour, that would be great.
That'd be great.
Yeah, that might be an opportunity. You know, maybe we can come back in June or something next year. Probably later in the fall will be a good time. We'll see where we're at.
When you started a little bit of the work.
Yeah, definitely think
Just to
about
see the
that.
progress. I
For
drove by
sure.
there yesterday thinking about it, and I was like,
Yeah.
it'd be so cool to see it.
Yeah, and definitely be checking our website, provo-river-delta.us. It's in the newsletter. And we're going to be kind of revamping the look of that in January. And that homepage will be basically our latest construction views, so that that's really obvious. And I think you guys have offered to kind of help us be getting the word out. Things will get a little more exciting in terms of impacts for people using the trails and stuff as we're diverting the river, and fall of 2022 will be a little bit interesting. So we'll definitely be making sure we're notifying everybody about what's going on and what areas are closed and so forth. I also have a newsletter sign-in. If any of you aren't getting that and want to get the newsletter I just handed out, either in hard copy or email, just make sure you do this. I'll leave it up here.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay, Sam.
I will keep things brief today. I just
Thank
have
you.
2 items I wanted to highlight on the communications front for you all. The first one listed on there is the Utah, or our photo gallery display, excuse me. So this is just an idea that arose that we wanted to test out, which is we do this photo contest every year, and we close it around September, October, and we always print off the winning canvases and do kind of a one-night gallery with the winners, their friends, family, etc. And this year we wanted to try and do a little bit better job of utilizing those canvases as a tool to continue our efforts of outreach to the community and helping improve public perception and seeing how beautiful the lake is and what recreation opportunities it has. So the first thing we tried was we actually did a week-long gallery at Allen's Camera, which is one of our sponsors. They have a new location here in Provo. So that's where we hosted our one-night gallery and then left it for a week. And then we started reaching out to the libraries. So as of right now, we actually have the gallery on display at Lehigh's Library until January. And then we're actually going to be in Springville. Just met with their director yesterday. So it'll be in Springville from January through the start of March. And then Orem's library is actually going to have it from March all the way through August.
Wow.
They had a nice big open window, and I said, I'll take all of it. And then American Fork Public Library, we're actually looking at for September and October. So if there is interest, I've already started contact with Saratoga Springs Library. We're working on some options there.
It's a little small for.
It is, but we're working on it. And I'm
Yeah.
talking with Ann as well about maybe
Good.
there's a special event we can partner with on it. And then we've reached out to others like Pleasant Grove and some other libraries too that I haven't heard back from yet. But the idea being to try and give another public setting, just like the tools that we give you guys. I should mention at this point, the back of your packets today is a color sheet, not black and white, but an in-color sheet of the winning photos from this year. So as you'll remember, in previous years we've done this, and we'll do it again this year. Your public offices are yet another great venue to house these canvases as a tool to have the public see just how beautiful the lake is and what recreation opportunities there are. So if you're interested in having one of the canvases on display in your offices, please put your name or organization name on that sheet today and mark it, and either just leave it at your spot or give it to me after, and we will facilitate getting those purchased and getting them to you at our next governing board meeting. Anyway, we've seen some success. I already went back 2 days later at Lehigh and was already told that the majority of their staff had already gone through and loved the display. We left some of my business cards and a few educational brochures next to the display as well. So it's another good way for people to get a little more information about what's going on. And then the second thing I just wanted to highlight quickly is that we are working on launching a podcast. So we've pursued a variety of communication tools over the years, social media, an online newsletter, this past summer doing our booths at the city festivals. And we wanted to test out this idea as well. It's an idea that I heard about when I attended the Utah Public Information Officers Conference in September. We actually had the producer of the Cold podcast was there and did a presentation about using podcasts as a communications tool. So our goal is to have it cover a variety of Utah Lake topics. The name we've been working with right now is Utah Lake Facts, Fiction, and Fun. We've already recorded one episode, Eric and I, talking about the future of Utah Lake and plans that are coming in the near future. And we have plans for 2 other pillar episodes, is what we're calling them right now. One about the 5 most common questions we get, and that's taken from data from our booth this summer, talking about algae blooms, the Utah Lake Restoration Project, carp removal. I'm forgetting the other 2 right now. I'm a little nervous, I guess. The 3rd episode is going to cover, I wrote this down actually, so that I wouldn't have to remember it. 3rd episode, no I didn't. Anyway, so we'll be working on that idea. We don't have it ready quite yet for launch. Right, there you go. So you gotta listen to hear. Our goal right now is to try and launch it the next month or so. We have somebody, one of our former interns, working on the cover art for us. I'm working on drafting some of the episode outlines, and like I said, we started recording one. So it's kind of a work in progress right now. So I'll definitely have more information for you in the future on that. Yeah.
How often will you have one, and what is the length?
Great question. So right now we want them to be about a half hour or less. We don't want them to be too long, but that's kind of a good length to cover the topics, because the main idea of why we are trying to pursue it is not very many people in the public attend these meetings, for instance, or technical committee meetings. And so they don't have a chance to have an in-depth conversation or ability to hear more than just a quick conversation. Like this morning, I'm checking out getting the the snacks this morning, and the checkout lady wants to start talking about the lake, and I'm like, I gotta run, I've got like 4 minutes to try and answer why we haven't dredged the lake yet. That's not really enough time. So the effort is to try and use these as tools. So, for instance, one future podcast would be about algae blooms. Another could be about the Utah Lake Restoration Project. Another one could be about the Provo River Delta Restoration Project. So a good way to kind of give them an in-depth view of what is actually happening and provide more information. Now, as to how frequently, to start with, my goal was to have 3 when we launch it, when we publish it, but either monthly or bi-weekly to start because of workload, trying to handle that and see how well it goes. If it's immediately immensely popular, we could move up that timeline, or if it's not used, we could easily just drop doing a podcast as well. So we're flexible on that to start.
Cool. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Erica,
I have slides, but I don't know if we have time.
I'm
Rather
thinking we
than just
probably,
speed through a quick update.
that would be probably better, yes, in this case.
Okay,
that would be
and
great.
Maybe at a future meeting,
Mhm.
I could do more in-depth
That would be great.
update.
Yep,
but I think we can do.
that'd be good, thank you.
So we're just coming off of a 2-day meeting with our science panel in our office. You'll recall that we have 10 science panel members, 5 independent and 5 ex officio. We had really pretty good attendance. And that's following a steering committee meeting we had last week that I think was also very productive. So on the technical side, we're working through data characterization. We had a long discussion about uncertainty guidance. So one of the things that will come out of this study is not just an answer, but a qualification of that answer, so that as policymakers, we can look at how confident we are in the answer, how much uncertainty there is, and that can help inform an eventual decision.
Let me ask you this, sorry, and if I missed it, because
Yeah.
what was the question? I mean, we have an answer.
Sorry.
What was the question?
So the question, this is the Utah Lake Water Quality Study, and the question is what are the appropriate nutrient concentrations that we should regulate towards in Utah Lake to support recreational uses, aquatic life, and agriculture? What is that? The science panel, and the group was formed, the study was formed a couple of years ago through a pretty heavily negotiated the makeup of a steering committee and then the steering committee sat a science panel. So that's how it all sort of started. The steering committee has representation from municipalities, publicly owned treatment works. Let me just pull up the list real quick here. Recreation, agriculture, public health, conservation and environment, water management, essentially Utah stormwater, and then Eric and I co-chair that steering committee. So the science panel launched 3 projects, studies last summer to kind of get started on the actual scientific research. So I'll just tell you really quickly, the science panel heard about initial results from those 3 studies yesterday and the day before. The first is a historic paleo study of the lake. So they took tours of the lake going back to the early 1800s to look at how the lake ecosystem and nutrient regime has shifted over time. So that will help us understand changes in the lake and put some bounds on what is possible in terms of lake restoration.
And they did that by taking core samples?
3 sites, 3 sites in the lake. Provo Bay, 1 out in the middle of the lake, and then 1 in the southern part of Goshen Bay. Is that right, 3? There's 5. Where are the other 5? The other 2 there.
They have the mixed up maps, but northern Goshen Bay, middle of the lake, Provo Bay, and then somewhere else. And then there's another 7 or 8 more, they're more located closer to the shoreline to look at changes in vegetation.
Not the plus,
Yep.
the core samples, how deep did they go with those, do you know?
They depend on the location in the lake. They're up to 2 to 3 meters. Essentially, the ones that we have dated, a better idea of how far back they go in time than they are deep. And they're going back into, the first core results that we've seen are back into the late 1700s.
The first 30 centimeters represents, from what I understand, post-settlement. So the last 160.
depending on where you are.
Oh, it varies.
Are we testing heavy metals or just
Looked
phosphorus?
at
level?
metals, phosphorus, nitrogen, and it's pretty cool what they can do with nitrogen isotopes. So not only can they look at the amount of nitrogen, they can look at the relative proportion of nitrogen from wastewater, fertilizer, natural sources. So we can kind of see how that's changed over time.
And most of that came from American Fork, but that's just,
There's no nitrogen in orange.
that's right, we're clear.
They have all the heavy metals, that's why.
Yeah,
The toilet with a direct
You need the
shot.
steel plant, had nothing to do with it.
So the second study that was launched last summer was also a sediment coring study, but much shallower, to look at sediment, water, nutrient interactions. So one of the questions that we all have had, and I think we will have and struggle with, is if we were to reduce nutrient loading to the lake, how long will it take for the lake to recover? Because there's a legacy load of nitrogen and phosphorus in the sediment. So we need to understand the dynamics of how much of that's getting released into the water column relative to what's coming in, and how those that dynamic and that chemistry changes if we were to change the loading into the lake. So that study's also going forward, and it's looking at kind of a number of different sort of biogeochemical processes. I should have said the first is being led by researchers at Utah State University. The second is a partnership with BYU and the University of Utah. And then the third study, the bioassays to investigate nutrient limitations. So basically they put these, we call them cubitaners, like little microcosms of Utah Lake out in the lake, and then they spiked them with different concentrations of more and less nitrogen and phosphorus to see how algae, toxins, all of that respond to varying levels. So this will help really answer the question of which nutrients are controlling algae, and it can help us answer the question of what happens if we decide not to do anything because of the growth projections for Utah County. If we were to increase, I mean, we keep talking about decreasing loading, as which the trajectory today would be to increase.
What
just
did you
because
call
of
that one?
population growth. They're called bioassays.
Bio.
So those are pretty cool, and the science panel heard some initial results from those today, or this week. In terms of just kind of flagging a couple issues for this group related to this study, we received a grant from the Water Quality Board for $1 million to conduct this study, and then with some help from the legislature, we got another appropriation for $500,000. That $500,000 also is paying for the treatment experiments that are going on that you heard about earlier. The balance of that money will go to the study. Right now, we're projecting, to cut to the chase, about $1 million shortfall in the study. So we have 1.5. We project that over the next 3 to 4 years, it will be more like 2.5. There's some reasons for that. The steering committee decided to add another phase to the project, which is the cost and implementation piece. So that could potentially increase.
Eric, is that implementing something to resolve the problems?
Yes.
Or, okay.
So the science panel is tasked with identifying what the correct scientific, solution would be in terms of nutrient concentrations. Then there's a whole other study to look at who's going to do what in the watershed to actually achieve that, and is it attainable?
Yeah, what does that
And
cost?
what does it cost? Right, exactly. So that piece has been added.
But that would be something that we would have to approve as a body. That wouldn't just be, the science panel can't just go,
The science panel didn't add that, the steering committee.
or the steering committee. The steering committee can't just go and say, hey, we're gonna do this and we're gonna go spend all this money. It's obviously something that has to come
Oh, for sure.
through
Yeah,
us. and-
so I'll speak to
Yeah.
process in a second.
Okay,
There's
perfect.
Many levels
Yeah.
of process here.
So,
Yeah.
quick question. So, when we talk about the phosphorus levels and things in the lake, it seems to me that I will read something from one expert just to be disproven by another expert. And so there's a wide range of opinions.
And that's
Is
why
this,
we
is this
put
the dream
together.
team? Is this the dream team that was put together? to just
Honestly,
kinda-
you guys, every time I walk in the room of the science panel, it's just incredible. We have the top limnologists in the country, the top lake modeler in the country. And we have people, and I can't understand, honestly, sometimes why they come and do this, but we're paying them. That's one.
You give us a bagel.
They are fascinated
Bagels.
with Utah Lake. I mean, we asked them that question at the last meeting, like, why Utah Lake? Why are you willing to do this? And they are so interested. It is unique. The chemistry is different. You know, the ecology is different. It's interesting. So
That's cool.
it is the dream team. And I love that we've got national level experts, and then we have, you know,
The
really
local.
high level state scientists as well at Utah State, BYU, that are contributing. So, yeah, I would say it is the dream team. And we have a process, and they don't agree on everything. We have a process to sort of vet and debate, and then eventually qualify the findings that they have, so that you all and all of the policy makers will have a sense of, okay, this is the recommendation, and here's how much confidence or uncertainty we have in that recommendation. Those qualifying statements will be made for each of the different findings. So I think that'll be really helpful
That'd be good.
for people like us.
That'd be good.
So anyways, there's a cost. The cost of the studies has been a little higher than we anticipated. So that's my job this next year, is to figure out how we're going to fund the other $1 million. And I've already started knocking on a few doors, because I think we're going to need to probably leverage existing funding within some of the members of the steering committee. So in terms of process, Mayor Frost, I want to just speak to that, because it has come up, and there has been some changes in the last year. So the way that this process was defined, and I'll share this slide with you if you haven't seen it, is that the steering committee seats the science panel. The recommendations for the scientists will come up with, I think, a group of scenarios, some options that are protective. They have to be protective for me to be able to sell them ultimately to EPA. But what we would like is the policymakers, which is the steering committee, and then this body, and then the Water Quality Board, to have a range of options to consider, so that you'll be able to look at, you know, what level of risk you're willing to accept for the cost that it would take to achieve that. So the science panel isn't going to just give us one number. They're going to give us a range of numbers and some uncertainty that then we can put costs to, and then we can debate, you know, and discuss what's the best solution for this lake. I do want to flag that the legislature passed legislation in 2019 that will require this final recommendation and regulation to be approved by the full legislature. So that's an added level of approval that wasn't there when we started. So, I mean, I'm a little nervous, and here's why I'm nervous. We're going to have thousands of hours of thinking and time that goes into the science panel, that then gets filtered into hundreds of hours at the steering committee. Maybe this body gets tens of hours, and then I'll have 3 minutes in front of a committee to explain it to the legislature. Which just means we're going to need to be bringing legislators and the local elected officials along as we go, so that it can't just be that 3-minute presentation. And I'd like to say it's more, but that seems to be the reality of the amount of things that the legislature has to deal with.
Well, and it might be helpful, because all of us are there and during the session talking to the legislators all the time about other needs. And so if you are able to communicate with us when you're going to be at the committee hearing, we can be sitting in the audience also as to point out, these are members of the Lake Commission who are here, and they then see the faces of the cities. It helps.
Well, and like Mayor Frost was talking about earlier, we meet regularly with them also, and
Yeah.
kind of give updates of here's what's going on, what do you see happening?
That'd be really
And that
helpful,
could be something that we
I
can
think, for
bring
this
up.
body to be, you know, up to speed on what's going on, and getting the legislators brought along as we go. So, you know, ultimately, our hope is that we reach a consensus recommendation from the policymakers, which to me is the steering committee, this commission, and the Water Quality Board, and then it becomes kind of a political decision once it gets up to the legislature.
Okay.
So with that, I'll leave it there.
That'd be great, yeah, and then we can get you on a future meeting,
Yeah, absolutely.
so we can actually go through a lot more of
You know,
that.
I'm real intrigued and excited that there's this much study going in. That's neat.
It should be good.
I would love to know heavy metals, just because we have all those canyons above us.
That come down?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes, we have the lake metal data. We collect that routinely.
But we are looking at some metals in the sediment only as they relate to their ability to react with phosphorus. And
I could ask Mike Mills to bring a little report on that. They did a study when they initialized the carbon removal program to figure out whether or not they could sell that as a food item,
Yeah.
and did some metals reports throughout the lake. So I'll ask him to find out how much information is there, and if he could do a short presentation of that.
Great,
Very good.
And
Thank
I
you.
can bring you the metals, we can package that up for you, the data we've got on water quality.
But, and Rich just pointed out that lead is one of the parameters in the cores that use lead 210 to date to figure out how old the sediments are.
Interesting.
And cesium, it's so cool the way they date this stuff. Based on the bomb testing that happened in the late 60s, they can date that year exactly. Space everything. I thought that's interesting.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, are we going to do June Sucker update? Are you going to take care of that, Eric, or just,
We can skip that.
we skip it? Okay, we'll pass that on next time. Perfect. Upcoming governing board meeting for the next year is there. Obviously, if that needs to be switched around, that can be moved forward. Planning right now for the June 18th to be the budget hearing. Any field trips that we might have to various areas will be scheduled outside of those meetings. Any comments from, let's take any public comments at this time? Please. Make sure you state your name.
I'll try to keep this to 3 minutes. My name is Richard Mickelson. I'm the Timpanogos Special Service District Manager. I've been there for about a year, well, just over a year. And so I, and the science, well, let me give you a little bit of background about Timpanogos. So we, back in 2009, Division of Water Quality put out and said, we're going to start looking at phosphorus. Phosphorus is something we're going to need to do for the different treatment plants. And so Timpanogos, knowing that they needed to do a plant upgrade, they incorporated a biological removal of phosphorus. It took us $80 million to upgrade. Provo's taken a great step to say, we're just going to go as clean as we can possibly get and just get it clean. So our facility now will, during the cold winter months, take phosphorus and hit about 0.3. This month, we hit 0.14.
Nice.
So we're able to do really well in the winter months. We bought a nice truck, if you want to look at it that way, a facility to do the job. But we got a lemon for the motor, the blowers. So those blowers need to be replaced. So Division of Water Quality gave us a variance so that we can try to make this happen more year-round, not just during the colder months. And so we're going to try to get more compliance by 2023. So there's kind of a moving target because we don't know what's going to end up happening with Utah Lake, what kind of numbers are going to be coming out of DWQ. But I want everybody to know that Timpanogos, for the last 10 years, have had 0 violations. We've been complying what DWQ's asked us to do. And that's what we do. So if they ask us to go with a lower number, we're going to try to do that. But we're trying to work ahead to try to stay ahead of the game. One of the things we're going to be doing, I've got at least 3 different options to try to make our plant continue to be clean. One of those is to do a wetland. We've got some property at the end of it. We want to try to do some wetland stuff and work with the Utah Lake Commission, which we'll come back and ask you guys here probably next year of making a trail go from Linden Bay all the way almost to Bow Harbor. So we're going to try to make that happen. So we're interactive, trying to make stuff happen. We've had some litigation issues with respects to odor. Please come to the next board meeting. We're going to be introducing probably a $100 million issue capital purchase that's going to be required to help us mitigate and handle our solids issues. So we're progressive trying to make stuff happen. But what I'm basically here for today is I've been attending the steering committee because I'm one member of the 16 members of that steering committee. And there's 16 members there, 1 POTW, and 3 municipalities. That comes to 4 member cities that when these regulations come down from DWQ, how is that going to affect the ratepayers? And Provo City's taken an aggressive step. Orem, where's Orem? Orem, they're going to take another aggressive step by doing water reuse and taking the water out of the lake during the warm months and reusing that water. And we're going to be trying to look at all of our options and get water clean to, my target is 0.1 on a 0.3 to 0.1 on a regular basis, irregardless of what happens coming from there. So we're aggressive as well, trying to make things happen. But what is alluded to, that there's the Wasatch Front Water Quality Council, where there's Spanish Fork, Payson, Provo, Orem, and Timpanogos. We're putting in about $250,000 a year into doing research, which is local research, which we have control over. Some of the stuff that we've been doing is looking at how much nutrients are coming down through and being deposited into Utah Lake. Looking at sediment reflux, the sediment and phosphorus that's coming in, being stirred up from the wind. Atmospheric deposition that's coming in from the phosphorus that's just, you can look outside and see the particulate in the air, and then when it rains, it's hitting Utah Lake. And so, Timpanogos is going to be funding a study this next year that's going to take a look at some of these liminal corrals that say, can we actually control, if we set certain parameters, can we get to this end goal of cleaning up the lake? So back to what Erica has said, that she's she's created this organization where the steering committee and it seats the science panels, and there's the science panel split into two, where there's the ex officios and the independent researchers. In my position, from where I'm looking at it, there's none of the independent people, science members, did we have say for the POTW's position that was there. Now this body right here approved that, so I'm not saying but you're getting information that's coming up from one direction. And we did get one member on the science panel, that's the ex officio member, and he causes quite a stir at times. But in the end, we're trying to get the science panel to bring up some recommendations. And just like Mayor Frost mentioned, you can have experts, but you can get the same paper and get different opinions from the exact same paper. An example was yesterday, or the day before, in the science panel evaluation, they were looking at these core studies. And they were presented out, the core study had three major things put on there. When were the pioneers came here, when was the carp introduced, and when were sewer plants there? And their evaluation of the data was, look at all the terrible part of the sewer plants here. And one of those core studies was in Goshen Bay, and I had, none of the independents knew that there's no sewer plants in Goshen Bay. So I had to raise the flag, or saying, are we implying that the Spanish Fork, Provo, Payson, that is discharging into Provo Bay, has that water's coming out of Provo Bay, going upstream, diffusing over to Goshen Bay? And the independent science panels turned around and said, no, that's a good point. So we may have some preconceived notions already, just because there's not that experience there. So my main point that I raised up in the steering committee was, we don't have enough members to break the major majority in the vote, so it's going to come up through the bottom, and you guys are going to accept the data because you were told, because the majority of the members voted for it, and you're going to have to look at the other view that might have said, well, the data actually means this in our opinion. So the unintended consequences are coming up. Two prime examples that you'll see coming up in the near future is this carp removal study. They spent $600,000 a year for what, 9 years to remove the carp. And now we're in the maintenance mode, and now they're spending $300,000 a year. The unintended consequence is, from what I've heard from the anglers and the fishery, is we were starving those carp, and that the population was so low that there was not a way to sustain the carp. And now the carp are big, and they're going to put out tons of eggs. You're going to have an overwhelming amount of carp that are coming down the pipe. Just millions and millions of small little carp now, and we're going to just have a proliferation of carp. And back to what I was getting with the sewer plants are, Provo and Spanish Fork and Payson, they go to Provo Bay. Provo Bay was naturally wetland bay area, was cleaning up phosphorus as it goes into Utah Lake, essentially below the levels that of 0.1. So it's essentially cleaned up the phosphorus. Orem, they did the same thing. They're cleaning up water, and I think our plant was the last one to come in at about 2014. So now we've created another perfect storm with respects to nitrogen limitation to the lake, and where the green algae, which is not toxic, is going to be limited at the lake. And now we've created, in my opinion, something that needs to look at, which I mentioned to the science panel, to look at, are we seeing that more growth of these cyanobacteria, these harmful algal blooms, because they are the ones that can float up to the surface and pull the nitrogen out of the air, and now we're creating potentially more toxins in the lake.
Okay.
So anyway, my 3
No,
minutes is
that's
up.
good. Richard, let's do this. Let's have you, Eric, him get with the executive committee. I just talked to Mayor Frost, and have him come in and talk about some of his concerns maybe, and see what we want to bring to the board as a whole, and then ways we might have.
Thanks
That'd be
for your
great.
time.
Okay, thank you. Perfect. Anybody else? Excellent. Anything from the board? I believe, Tice, you had, Councilman Flick.
Just real quick, we finished another quarter-mile of trail down on the lake, which is gorgeous. If you get a minute to go down there, that was quite a feat. Next year, if all goes well and the developers cooperate, we'll finish the last 100 yards to connect all the way up to Lincoln,
Excellent.
which will be great.
Very good. Congratulations. Okay. Anything else? Excellent. With that, we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting, and we'll meet in March for the governing board. It's the next meeting, and Mayor Frost and Councilman Jensen will take over on that.